You know, when I look back at all of the games that I've played over the years, there was one series that always slipped my mind. And I've never played a Legend of Zelda game. But today, I figured I'd go back to see where the legend started. I've always heard this was an amazing franchise, and through my childhood, it just wasn't around. It wasn't on store shelves, it wasn't something my friends were playing. They were all GTA, and I'm over here playing a mature game like Mario Party.
Take the
I'm going to
star!
channel all of my power
Take
into
the
this
star!
one move.
Take the star!
But you know, I'm a bit older now, and I make my own games. And one of the things I want to do with one of my next projects is make a game that's more open, a bit more adventurous. And I figured no better place to look than the one that started it all. Since the very first game, I've been told the Legend of Zelda series has been groundbreaking in terms of its adventure, combat, storytelling, everything of the like. When thinking about which one I wanted to do, I thought long and hard about what one would be a great start, and I figured it'd be a lot harder to go back in time, so I figured I'd see the general progression. I've heard every Zelda game is a masterpiece, and that way, you know, I just get to see all of them as they came out. So you've decided to play Zelda 1. The first question you have to ask yourself is, are you going to use a guide? For those who don't know, the first Legend of Zelda is very well known for, at least in modern times, being a guide game. A guide game being a game where, in order to fully enjoy it, most people would consider using a guide because there are requirements from the game, whether it's an item, going to a secret exit, or kneeling still for 5 seconds at a random wall. The game is so cryptic about what you need to do that in order to win, you need to use a guide. I've been told for years this game requires one, and it's a fairly open game, and often to its detriment. My uncle told me when he was a kid that they would pass around secrets and discoveries at the playground, and if you were a richer kid, you might have access to Nintendo Power or some sort of guidebook that would help you beat the game. I wasn't exactly sure how I wanted to go about it. I wanted to get the 80s experience, but apparently some kids in the 80s had access to guides, so I decided early on to make some simple ground rules. 1. If I get stuck, I can use a guide. The good news is I only ended up using it for about 2 things, and both of them were pretty minor. 2. No using guides during dungeons. As I found out pretty early on, dungeons don't really have this I don't know what to do issue most of the time. I won't lie. I was pretty nervous going in. I knew some stuff about the game, just from, you know, hearing about it over the years. Like, I knew going in who Zelda and Link were, and I knew I had to stop Ganon, but I didn't know what exactly to expect from the gameplay. That said, it starts pretty simply. You're just thrown into the overworld and immediately you see the cave, but then you see the man in the cave who's memed to death. Oh, it's dangerous to go alone, take this. And then you take it, and then, you know, I try to stab him a few times. But anyways, the sword is your basic damage dealer. It's the one weapon that every enemy can be hit by, and at full health, in this game specifically, becomes a projectile, which is huge in this game. Seriously, it's so much harder to hit enemies without it. Later in the game, there's other items you can use in case you're not at full health as projectiles, but the sword is legit my favorite weapon. But from here, simply put, you just explore. Again, there's nothing really telling you what to do. You'll find some enemies around, and they'll often drop rupees and hearts for you to collect, rupees being super useful early game because I ended up finding caves that had a merchant just chilling inside it. And then I bought some bombs off of a guy, and then this immediately opens up new secrets I didn't even realize yet. Bombs are limited. You can only have up to 8 at a time. Very late in the game, you can get some bomb upgrades, getting from 12 to 16, if you pay 100 movies to these guys within dungeons, but thankfully most enemies drop them pretty often, so I never really had to worry about farming bombs, but they come in useful because oftentimes whenever you bomb a wall that you can go into, you usually see an old man or a merchant, or sometimes these moblins that hold secrets, and I guess they just give you money to keep quiet about that. What's the secret? That they're just staying in the cave? I don't know. But it is funny to imagine that they just don't want to fight and they're going to get yelled at or fired, so they just found a cave and sat in there until you found them and then they freaked out. One of the other things I tried to do was actually reading the manual before playing. And side note, it's actually online on Nintendo's website for free. It's a fun read. It's actually pretty cool. They used to put a lot of effort into manuals back in the day. It said one of the things I can do early on is buy a blue candle. I found one in a cave close to the start, and the candle is pretty useful. It can burn bushes and whatnot, but the downside is you can only light it once per screen. There is an upgrade later on in the game to make it use it whenever you want, but unlike bombs, it is unlimited, so you can just leave the screen and come back. Sadly, this opened me up to what is considered the worst part of the game. It's not too bad, but the biggest complaint or criticism this game normally gets is the idea that sometimes you need to randomly burn random bushes and bomb random walls. Sure, some key items and extra goodies are a little more easy to see, like some that are behind these statues that turn to life, but those are way more clear to see. Many of the secret moblins and old men behind the walls, let me give you a good example. Guess which one they're under? Which bush? Can you tell? How come you can't tell? Well, you know what you're supposed to do? You need to burn every single bush, and you need to bomb every single wall until you find what you're supposed to find. This is one of the biggest reasons people don't like Zelda 1, and I understand completely. My uncle warned me about it, reviewers always talked about it, and I knew going in it was going to be a pain. However, I will defend it a little bit. Mainly because the bushes, while annoying, you have infinite burns from the candle, and bombing the walls most of the time are in places where bombing a wall makes sense. It really just depends. Later in the game, I was starting to be able to guess where the bomb should go, and that was pretty satisfying. Bushes, on the other hand, hit or miss. My only other defense is, well, there isn't any item you have to get from these. In dungeons and whatnot, sure, sometimes you have to bomb walls. But dungeons are kind of an exception that I'll talk about in a bit. The point is, every item required for completion either comes from dungeons or comes from a location that can be accessed without the use of the candle or bombs. Don't get me wrong, there's still super useful stuff in these secret areas like arrows, heart containers, upgrades to your sword and shield, and rings that give you defense boosts. So yeah, it is super annoying that it's locked behind using a guide or farming bushes and walls for a few hours, but on a more positive note though, the overworld itself is actually pretty cool. There's a fairly large variety of different types of areas you can go around, and it's very interesting seeing all the little places that would actually come into the later games. Like, I know of Lost Woods, Death Mountain, the Graveyard. It makes the place feel much more alive than most, and I know that's a comment people say a lot for like open world-esque games, but again, I've played a lot of games that have come before Zelda. I'm telling you, nothing is as close as this, at least at this point. Regardless, there's only so much you can do in the overworld. So, what exactly do we need to do to beat the game, you might be asking? Simply put, we gotta kill Ganon and rescue Princess Zelda. Ganon's locked away Zelda, and she split the Triforce into 8 different pieces. And to get to Ganon's dungeon, we need to collect all the pieces that she split up that are in the different dungeons. 8 pieces across 8 dungeons, plus one final one, that means 9 different dungeons. Every dungeon is in a different location in the overworld. Some obvious, while some not so much. You can do most of the dungeons in the New Order, but some require some items that you can collect from other ones. I actually ended up finding some of them out of order, finding level 8 pretty early on by accident, but I figured the enemies would be pretty tough, so I waited till I had more gear and when I was stronger, and glad I did. And one of the things I really find fun is each dungeon is named after a different object or creature, usually based on somewhat of whatever the dungeon layout's looking like. Unlike in the overworld, you get a much better clue as what to do here. You need to find the boss room, beat the boss, and then pick up the Triforce piece. Level 1 is the Eagle, and it's pretty simple. Dungeons in general, all you really need to do is keep moving forward. Most of them you can do without a guide, because it's pretty straightforward. They have a good blend of puzzle solving as well as combat, though later on, combat becomes the main focus. Sometimes you'll need keys for certain areas, which you can get by defeating enemies, while in other areas are locked until you beat the enemies. You'll often actually pick up more keys than you need doors, and then later in the game, I ended up going to a dungeon with 2 or 3 spare keys, and actually, by the end game, 5 or 6 spares. Also, you'll often come across different items. Most of these items are required for later dungeons, and going in order makes it feel a bit more like you're naturally progressing and becoming stronger. I know there's a big conversation if Zelda is better being open world or linear, but I don't know. It just felt more fun going in order in this case, because I didn't get any game-breaking items early on. Usually these come in weapons or just movement abilities. Oftentimes there are also secrets to be found, like old men who actually give pretty good hints for the time period. Other items you'll find in the dungeons are compasses and dungeon maps. Compasses tell you where the boss is. Most dungeons give you the compass first, and it gives you very little info, because you don't have the dungeon map, so you just see a blinking dot on the other side of the map. I suppose it's supposed to steer you towards your end goal, which direction you might want to start pushing towards, but your dungeon map is way more useful as it gives you the entire layout. And if you ever get stuck, you can also pause the game and check what rooms you've already been in. I won't lie, this was probably the best part of the game. The puzzles were nothing crazy, and it's mainly more of a combat endurance test than anything, but exploring these big things felt super fun. Good example, remember bombing walls and how annoying that was? Well, oftentimes you can bomb ones in dungeons, and I actually think it's kind of fun. And I think that's mainly because you get a good hint of what you're supposed to do. For example, if I kill all the enemies in the room and bombs appear in the middle, there's a good chance the bombs are needed to bomb a wall in that room. The only time I think it was mandatory, the game literally tells you you need to bomb one of the walls. Most of the time, they're just used for shortcuts or just finding extra goodies. I would go more in depth with how I feel about each dungeon in particular, but unlike later games where there's a forest temple and a fire temple and a water temple, they're just kind of dungeons that just get kind of bigger and tougher. Trust me, at the beginning, they're pretty easy. You're mainly fighting key spats and whatnot. But later on, starting in like dungeon level 4 and 5, you start facing off against two of my least favorite enemies. The Wizzrobes, which can attack you with a projectile and teleport a lot, making them hard to hit. And Dark Nuts, where you have to hit them from the side. And they have so much health, and they both do so much damage. And when you get to the later dungeons, they are an endurance test. The only other thing is the bosses, which, none of them are crazy special. A lot of them are weak to a certain item. Like there was this one spider-like guy with an eye that I hit with an arrow and I one-shot him. I didn't even know that was his weakness. But there's other stuff like the Dodongos, which actually start appearing more often in groups. But you just throw a bomb towards them, stun them, and then hit them with your sword, and they're super easy. But then you have the dragons, which are pretty much just hit them, don't die. And they can be pretty tough, especially the ones that have multiple heads. I think they're called Gleeoks. Seriously, these guys, I had to brute force my way to win. But after that, I had all pieces of the Triforce, and it was complete, and it was time to go face Ganon. I found him being inside of Death Mountain, which I actually thought was just going to be a shop, but lo and behold, oh boy. Level 9 is nuts. The music's unique in this dungeon. It's a lot more scary, it's a lot more dreadful, it fills you with fear. Like I said, it's the biggest dungeon by far. There's so many twists and turns and dead ends. You have Wizzrobes, Dark Nuts, Wizzrobes with Dark Nuts. It's just so much. There's also new enemies like this bug thing called a Patra. It's trickier to dodge them at first, but after a while I started to get their pattern down. In fact, I actually got better at being defensive in general. In fact, there were many enemies in rooms that I would just skip because this dungeon, unlike a lot of the other ones, is more of a maze. You're not really just kind of pushing towards the end. There's a lot of different rooms you have to go in that'll take you to different parts of the dungeon, and again, it's not very clear what you're supposed to do. The best thing you can do is normally just explore, but dude, it took me 2 hours. Normally dungeons take me around maybe 20 minutes tops normally, and I was just so stuck. I did get 2 upgrades though. One to my arrows, which I actually found on my second run, which I'll talk about later, and also a Red Wing, which changes our clothes again, and also the last defensive, which I very needed because I'm not good at this game. I'm not afraid to admit it, but eventually, I finally got to Ganon, who I thought was going to be a lot more menacing, but he's just this chunky pig dude. I wouldn't say Ganon is tough. More than anything, he's just kind of annoying. This is because he goes invisible, and in the dark he will shoot you with his, energy orbs, I guess. It gives you a good idea where you need to aim, but it took me a while to figure out how you actually deal damage. You have to attack him with your sword, and then you have to use your silver arrows to kill him and finish him off. I can just feel the cringe from that. But after a not so long battle, Ganon turns to dust, and Zelda isn't far away. I walk into the next room, and of course I walk into the fire by accident, but then when I walk up to Zelda, I beat the game. Zelda thanks us, and the land is back to normal. That's it! I beat Zelda. It's crazy to imagine I actually beat this game. No pun intended, but I heard legends of this game, or in this franchise, for a long time, and I didn't think it was gonna live up to the hype. The open world aspect is kind of fun. Yeah, bombing random walls is annoying, but most of the time, you weren't having to do that. And dungeon crawling, while tough as nails, was still super satisfying when it went well, and it was able to pull me into the world and feel very immersed. I was genuinely really caught off guard by how good this game was and how much it held up. I'm so happy to finally see why people love Zelda, and I can't wait to see what's next from this series. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked the video, consider telling me what other games you'd like to see me play in the future. But more than anything, do me a favor, and as always, stay awesome. Bye.